The coronavirus outbreak has hit another milestone as more cases are recorded outside of China than within it. And as the infection rate slows inside China, it's been spreading across new areas. Latin America has recorded its first case. So too have several more European countries. All those have been linked to people who've been to Italy, where infection numbers are continuing to rise. There's also increasing concern about Iran, where at least 19 people have died as the government there rules out quarantine. Well, let's look more at what's happening on the ground in two virus hotspots. Kerry Allen is our China media analyst and Taraneh Stone is Iran specialist at BBC Monitoring. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Kerry, I want to ask you first of all, bring us up to date on what we know about what's happening in social media in China. What are people saying about the coronavirus there?
Well, they're seeing the latest figures. So, people have been getting used to seeing everyday maps, updating them on the number of figures. So at the moment, there are 78,000 cases within China. But there's been a real slowing down outside of Hubei province, which is where this all started. So much so, in fact, that there are only 5 cases that have been reported outside Hubei in the last 24 hours. So what people have been seeing are graphics showing all of the provinces, municipalities and autonomous regions in China in a big rainbow shape. And people can find their area and see how many cases there are there and how many days it's been that there haven't been cases. So it's very much been the case that a number of regions, most regions in China now, are having no new cases and may actually not get any more.
It's difficult, isn't it, to work out exactly what's happening because there is, from some quarters, a lack of trust in what Chinese authorities are saying, what information is getting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there have been cases recently of 2 citizen journalists within Hubei province who have suddenly disappeared. So there was a man called Fang Bin, who was a local business entrepreneur who was driving around and saying that he wanted to show the real story of what was happening in Wuhan. Another journalist, Chen Qiushi, he went missing and he said that he visited hospitals, he was live streaming in hospitals, and we've not heard from them. Now, there has been obviously government reporting on this, and the World Health Organization has said that there has been a huge degree of transparency that China has given. But because Hubei is still a very sensitive area, there are tens of thousands of cases there, there is sensitivity as to what local people are actually putting on social media and saying about it.
And there has been some criticism, hasn't there, of the way that the Chinese authorities have been looking after their own citizens during this outbreak, especially those in quarantine.
Yeah, well, the thing is, everybody's been focused on the coronavirus and forgetting about just normal, vulnerable people. I mean, we saw last month there was a disabled boy who was left alone because his father was taken into quarantine and he died because nobody could feed him. There's been a case as well in the last 24 hours of a 6-year-old boy and the local medical authorities were going to people's homes and doing temperature checks, and they found out that he was living with his grandfather who died and for a number of days because he had no way of contacting, and people were basically just being left to their own devices and forgetting that there are vulnerable people in society. Also, video footage of homeless people still within Hubei province who volunteers have been visiting. These are people that are being forgotten about with the coronavirus going on. OK,
Kerry, thank you. And Taraneh, you, of course, have been keeping a very close eye on what's going on in Iran. What's the latest on the number of new cases there? Because there's not a big correlation, is there, between how many cases we know there are and how many deaths have been announced?
Exactly. There has been conflicting reports ever since the outbreak was announced. The numbers are rising, we know that, but the numbers that authorities say they are sometimes conflicting. What we know right now from the confirmed figures is that 139 people have been infected, 19 of whom have died. There are concerns that figures are higher than what they announced and that the government is actually downplaying the crisis. But we know that 18 provinces out of 30 have been contaminated, and the city of Qom is the epicenter of the virus. And this is highly significant because Qom is a major holy city. If I want to describe it, is the Vatican of Iran. Millions of pilgrims travel to Qom every year from different parts of Iran and different parts of the world, really. A lot of seminary schools are there, a lot of high-profile clerics live there, so it's actually quite concerning.
So what about the response from the government? Because it's ruled out quarantine so far. What has the government done?
Well, As I said before, government and the state media are downplaying the crisis. They say that we don't believe in quarantine. We just tell people to stay in the cities, that don't travel out if they're living in cities that are contaminated. They say that the situation will be normal from next week, and they call it, President Hassan Rouhani called it a virus of fear, which he was referring to what he called the hostile media outlets trying to cause fear and panic among the public.
And what about social media in Iran? What are they saying on that briefly?
Social media, well, they're mocking the authorities. They question the transparency of the government about the issue. There are a lot of flashbacks about how the authorities have managed a crisis before it. Someone said on social media, look after yourselves. No one is building you a hospital in 10 days, referring to the hospital that was built in China in 10 days when the...
OK, interesting. Really fascinating to hear how the two different countries are dealing with it. Carrie Allen, Torana Stone, thank you so much for joining